A coding language is how one communicates with a computer and tells it what to do and exactly when to do it. There are dozens of coding languages out there, from JavaScript, Python, to C#. Each one contains its own rules about how it works, the way you write it, and what is and what isn't allowed. But at the core of it, a coding language is the communication between the coder and the computer. If you want your player to move up when you press the up arrow key, then you have to tell it that with a coding language. The actual expression of that language, like the words and the letters that are typed, will vary from language to language, but in the end, that code gets translated by the computer and executes to do exactly what it's told. When it comes time to begin coding your game inside of GameMaker, you've got two distinct options for coding languages. When you add an event, you're going to be presented with this question. Do you want to use GML code or GML Visual? GML code is that more traditional way of coding, where you are writing text and using symbols to control everything that's happening. GML Visual, on the other hand, uses blocks, and they chain together and they link in a way that is much more understandable, especially to beginners. Inside of your project, you can have both GML Visual and GML code running at the exact same time. When it comes time to test your game out, all of it converts to the same thing in the end, and your game will run just the same. So you can choose one or both of them and be able to make the exact kind of game you're looking to make. In GameMaker, when you're in an event that uses GameMaker Language Visual or GML Visual, like I am in this Create event, the code blocks available to you are over on the right. Everything from the most commonly used all the way down to time sources and particles, which are specific features inside of GameMaker, are available to you as code blocks that you can drag inside. And these code blocks are what execute and how your game runs. And so you can drag code block on top of code block, and you can see that it's a visual way of representing what's actually happening inside of your game. In the end, when you're ready to run your game, GML Visual is the same thing as GML code. So you can make whatever game you want using GML Visual. When we begin coding with GML Visual, you're going to notice that there are three distinct sections that your code window is broken down into. On the left is the outline of all the code blocks you're using. In the middle are the code blocks themselves. And on the right is the toolbox that houses every single block of code that you can use. Now, let's do a little bit deeper of a dive into GML Visual. Let's first start by taking a look at the toolbox. We've been calling these code blocks because they are blocks of code, but they also go by the name action blocks. And that's because when we put one in, like this assign variable, it is going to perform an action. So it's a block of code that does something. Therefore, we call it an action block. This one in particular has the name assign variable. It has a field called name, a field called value, and a checkbox for relative. And most of the action blocks that you can use are going to look very similar. If I drag in another one, like this create instance action block, you'll see that it has multiple fields, multiple checkboxes, but it still looks pretty much the same. Now, you'll also notice that as we are building up the action blocks we have in the middle section, the outline is starting to fill up too. So every single action block that we put in the middle will be included in this outline. So it's easy to see what your code is doing at a very quick glance, because you can add many action blocks into any single event, which can make it difficult to see what's happening. To account for that, there are a few controls right up here at the top. So let's say I continue dragging in a few more code blocks, and I put enough in that it was becoming difficult to see. Well, we have some options for that. Up here, we can zoom out with this button. We can reset the zoom with this button. We can zoom in if we want to. We can also center fit, which is going to fit every single action block inside. You can also use your middle mouse wheel to do this. If you just use the middle mouse wheel up and down, we'll go up and down, you can hold control to zoom in and out with the middle mouse wheel, and you can hold the middle mouse wheel and drag this around to get to the exact spot that you want to access. And if you find you don't need an action block, you can click on it, press delete, and it will ask you if you're sure you want to delete it. Click OK, and then it's gone. I'm going to go ahead and select this bottom one, hold the shift key to allow me to select many of them at once, and then click up here and press delete. So that will actually take care of deleting all of those that I selected. Now let's do a deeper dive into the colors, because the colors of the action blocks signify what they're doing. So once you have a good understanding of a color and what it represents, it will help you find it faster. So the first color is blue, and blue has to do with setting data and variables. We have things like this assign variable where we can create or update a variable, but we also have things like setting a sprite. And the sprite that an object is controlled by a variable, and this action block controls that. There's also things for movement. So if I wanted to start moving in a direction, I would use these blue action blocks to set a direction, and I can set a speed. These action blocks control the variables for that data. The red action blocks have to do with doing something to the game and having an action happen immediately. So this action block, create instance, will create something inside of your game. We tell it what object to make, and it will create it. We can also destroy instances if we wanted to get rid of one, but we can also do other things like creating other assets. We can show and hide the virtual keyboard that's available. We can also immediately move to a point on the map. So red means that something is going to happen instantly. You'll be able to notice it. Next is green. Green is more for logic and questions. So the most common green one that you'll see will be this if variable action block. This is how you ask a question in code. By putting this inside, we can say if something is true or not true, then we can run specific code based on that. So let's say we wanted to jump to a specific point if we were next to a warp. We can actually drag this action block, jump to point, and put it on the right side of this if variable action block. And now the flow of our code has changed, and we can see that visually. Not only is the color of the line different from blue to green, it is now also on the right side of this code block. And that's because when asking a question, you can have a yes or a no answer. If it's yes, it will execute the code on the right, and when it's done with that, it will then continue on. So if I drag another assign variable statement here, I can either put it under this one, so this code will only run if this if variable runs, or I can drag it and I can put it underneath here, which then shows through this blue line that this code will continue running no matter the answer to this question. And all the green action blocks will have to do with if something is happening, like checking the value of a variable, or checking to see if a key is being clicked, or a mouse is being moved, things like that. Then, if we scroll down, we have a few more colors that are important to know about. This light brown color is all about drawing. So if I drag this one in here, this says draw value, and that means that I can draw text on the screen. We can also draw sprites on the screen. We could draw a full health bar with an action block. This is a much larger action block, But it's really useful because oftentimes you'll want to draw the health of a player or an enemy. Then we have the purple action blocks. These all have to do with playing sounds, either background music, sound effects, or anything in between. Purple is how you're going to choose when to start, how loud it is, and when you want it to stop. Gray over here has to do with loops and logical conditions like switches. If you want to do something many, many times, a loop is how you'll do that. Then we come down, and we can come all the way to the bottom, and we can find particles, this yellow action block. The particle system allows you to create really fantastic and fun particles on the fly. And all of these action blocks allow you to set the specific type of particle and how it will actually work. If you want to create snow, you can do that. If you want to create lava, you can do that too. And that's all the colors of the action blocks that you need to know about. The other thing that's really good to know is that there are two sections at the top called recently used and favorites. So you'll notice that this recently used section is now the ones that we actually pulled up last. So if you find yourself using one frequently, check here and it will probably be right there. If you find one that you use all the time, go ahead and right click on it and you can make something your favorite. And as soon as you do that, it lists it under the favorites tab. And the last thing to know in the toolbox is you can actually search. So if you're looking for a specific action block and you just don't know what it is, you can just search and every action block with that name will appear. So if you know it has to do something with an instance or you know you want to draw something, all of them will be right there. And now you're ready to go start using GML Visual. GameMaker language code, or GML code for short, is the language created specifically for GameMaker. To use it, you're going to write statements kind of like you can see right here. And each thing you write is also going to be color coded. So you'll see that we've got orange, blue, green, red, and yellow. Each one of these means something else. Blue is for instance variables. Orange is for keywords and functions. Green is for built-in variables. Red can be for data types or assets. And yellow is for strings. To write GML code, when you want to make your game, you're going to put GML code inside of these events, and you're going to have your game execute that code and do exactly what you've told it to do. But for that to work properly, you have to follow the rules. GameMaker language code has its own set of rules. Let's say I wanted to put my name inside of a variable. I can create a variable called my name and assign that the value of Aaron. This is a statement. GML code is a series of statements and expressions following one after the other. And then when you put it all together, you've got your game. But you have to follow the syntax or the rules of GML code. For this statement, if I erased this equal sign, GameMaker is going to tell me that's not allowed. It's going to put up this big red circle and say, hey, you can't do that. And if I tried to run my game right now, it's not even going to work. I can't even get to the start screen because I am not following the rules that have been set out for GML code. You want to create a variable? You've got to use this equal sign. But how do you know what those rules are? Well, it's not a guessing game. Fortunately, everything that you need to know is inside of the manual. Right here, this GML code overview is going to have everything that you need to know. You can scroll down and find the basic of the code structures, the functions that you'll be using, what things like variables, conditions, data types, and expressions are, how to create your own functions, and more. The rules of a computer language are written, essentially, in stone. They're things that don't change. So when you learn how to use them and how to follow those rules, your code is going to work. Because in the end, a computer does exactly what it's told. So, if you're ever confused on something you're writing, go ahead and right-click on this and go to Keyword Help. This is going to bring up that manual, and then you can start scrolling through until you find exactly what you're looking for. And once you've found it, do some reading, and you'll be all ready to go. What is the difference between GML code and GML Visual? The biggest distinction is that one of them is a written code and one of them uses action blocks. Now, on the surface, it looks like they're very different, but when you drill down, all of the code, both in GML code and in action blocks, gets executed as GML, and the games run exactly the same. So, are there any differences you really need to know? The big one is that GML Visual cannot do everything that GML code can. In GML Visual, you are stuck with the action blocks available. Now, there are dozens and dozens of action blocks, and you can create full, awesome games with them. But when it comes to GML code, there are no limitations because you can actually write it yourself. If there's a function that doesn't exist, or something that you want to be able to do in GameMaker that hasn't been done before, you can go and make that happen with the code you write. And that is a powerful feature of programming that is just not available inside of GML Visual. GML code also takes up a lot less space. This code takes up 2 lines. I'm setting the speed to 5 pixels a second, and I am moving the player up. In the step event, over here in GML Visual, I'm doing the same thing. I'm setting the speed to 5 and the direction to 90. Now, the GML Visual actually has a pretty nice advantage here. I can actually choose the direction with arrows here. And you can see that in the outline, it equates to the exact same thing, but you have a visual here, which is great when you're starting out because sometimes you just don't know what everything is. But this takes up a lot more space. If I were to add in another dozen lines here, it would be around this long. That's readable. But if I were to add another dozen action blocks, depending on how large they are, it might take up the entire screen, which is going to require scrolling here and there. And that can start getting a little frustrating. Imagine having hundreds of action blocks inside of an event. It can get a little overwhelming. And so the readability will often go to code. But if you don't understand what the code is doing, or you're not sure what all the symbols are, then GML Visual is great for that. How do I know which version of GML is best for me? Well, let's try and tackle this from a couple different points of view. If you are brand new to programming and game development, GML Visual is probably the best thing for you to start with. It's great for beginners. It's a visual scripting language, which is often great for when you begin programming. And it's easy to get started because everything you can do is right there in your toolbox. If you have some programming and development experience, then GML code is probably where you should start. It's powerful, flexible, color-coded, so it's easy to get into if you have some coding experience. And if you're looking for help for complex problems, you'll find more forums and videos on GML code than GML Visual. But the answer really depends on where you're at in your programming journey. GML Visual is fantastic for beginners and visual learners. If you have much experience coding, probably GML code is where you should go. But the beautiful thing is you don't have to choose one. You can have both in your game project, and you can switch from one to the other. In GameMaker, you can click on an event and transfer it from GML Visual to GML code. And that means that you can start in one, get used to it, and then move to the other, and you'll be all set and ready to go. There's even a live preview inside of GML Visual so that you can drag and drop those action blocks and see what it looks like in GML code. And when that starts making sense, it's probably time to make the change.